Hey everybody. I just
Hi.
want to say I promise you all sometime soon I am going to get a real countdown. I'm not going to use a stock countdown anymore. We're going to have like an official inside dotNET countdown. I promise. We're going to take care of it. Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Last week, Rodney and I were on the stream and we were talking about some of the things we like to have on our machines. We talk about like developer machine setup, like tools we use, command line tools, GUI tools, editors, settings, scripts, configurations, all that type of stuff. And while we were doing the stream, we realized, well, we actually didn't have enough time to get through everything we wanted to talk about. So we're like, oh, let's do it again, right? And so what we're going to do today, I'm going to continue talking about my setup a little bit. We have Alan back with us this week. Super
Yes.
happy to have her
Hi.
back, and she's going to talk to us about some of her
Thanks,
setup.
Ronnie.
Right? So that's what we're going to do today. Um, but before we get into that, like, how are you two doing? Like, what's going on? How's everybody been?
I'm doing great. I watched part one and I felt like I learned a lot from part one yesterday. Just a lot of tools that I didn't even recognize or know
Yeah.
about. I know a little about Homebrew, and I know I'm a Mac user, you're a Mac user. I would love to have a conversation just like describing what Homebrew really is. So
Sure.
So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
we can do
super
that.
excited to learn and share my tools for .NET.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then I know last week you were at a conference, right? Like, tell us about that. Like, how did
Yes.
that go?
Yes, I was at the DevReach conference in Boston. It was
Mhm.
super fun. It was my first in-person conference. My first conference was .NET Conf, and the DevReach was my second, but it was my first in person, and it was just so nice to meet everybody. Julie Lerman, like David Pine,
Yeah.
all of these amazing people. Isaac Levins, like it.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
was such a fun experience, and I'm excited for the next one.
That's awesome. I'm glad you had a good time. And it sounds like you kind of rattled off like some folks that we have on our guest list that we need to get on the show. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
we need to
Isaac's
take
on
care
my
of that
list. I
one.
want him to come teach some AWS stuff. I haven't seen much
Yeah.
in the way of
Me
C#
too.
and AWS, so I'm looking to get him on sometime in
Yeah.
the future.
He's so cool.
Yeah,
Everyone's so
Isaac's good
nice.
people.
So yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. What about you, Ronnie? What's going on, man? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Nothing much. Just started to dig into some of the new .NET MAUI stuff this past week, getting my,
Yeah.
figuring out how .NET 3.1 installs on an M1 Mac, just playing
Yeah.
around with finishing my development setup that I started about a month ago. So just trying to figure out what the differences are between what I came from to where I am now and trying to get some
Yeah.
learnings from it.
Nice. I love how you're positioned because you're like positioned this way so we can see all the artwork that you have on your back wall. And I know you
So
did it on
that
purpose.
art.
Don't tell me you didn't. I know you did
No,
it on
it
purpose.
is on purpose. As a matter of fact, my wife, because she's amazing, she helped me measure the wall space. I have a sit-stand desk right here, so I know
Brilliant.
exactly how high it goes. And I actually wanted this as my background for my live stream because I think that the artist is amazing.
I love it.
And
Brilliant.
these are some of my favorite characters, and I'm a cartoonist. Not
That's awesome.
drawing, but I like cartoons.
Oh
That's
yeah,
awesome.
that's a whole community in itself. Like
Exactly.
I love it. I love it. Have you ever tried? I know a lot of folks use. I think it's called Procreate or something like that. It's like the app on the iPad that makes you look like you're like a super professional artist kind of thing.
Yeah.
What? That
Yeah.
sounds fun.
Nope.
No, you never tried it?
I cannot draw. I am not good at art. I actually,
Yeah.
I'll just go ahead and say it. I failed art in high school. Like, actually got an F. It was great. It was an amazing experience. Computer animation. That's when I realized like computer animation was just not going to be my
It's just
thing.
not gonna
Oh
work out.
no.
It's funny. So when I was in high school in Antigua, I guess similar to you, like art was like a major subject. You know what I mean? It was like English, math, and art.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And
Oh,
I was
wow.
horrible at it. It was like I had A's in every other class except art. Art, they'll be like A art.
Art.
Right?
Yeah.
It was bad. It was so bad. It was so
Yeah.
bad.
Art was bad for me.
But you know what? You figure out early on sometimes like some things are just not meant for you, and you just gotta leave them alone, right?
And
And
that's okay.
you just gotta leave them alone. And that's kind of how I feel about like development, right? I figure like some things in the space that we're in, some things are just not for me. Like I am never going to be a designer. I'm never going to be like an HTML, CSS
Mm.
master, at least when it comes to like designing things and making them look pretty.
Yeah.
I can move it and I can add functionality to the button, but like don't ask me to like make it look pretty and give it transitions and stuff like that. Like
Nope.
that's just this is not the space that's gonna happen in.
Yeah.
It's not where I can best use my talents.
It is not. It is not. It is not. So, but that being said, I do want to show off what I use my talents for. So I'm going to share my screen real quick, and let's kind of get into it and start talking about like again like some of our developer setups. So I'm going to add my screen to the screen. I'm going to add my screen to the stream, and let's kind of go through this a little bit. So last week, so I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to recap some of the things I talked about last week, and then kind of just dive into some of the things I did not get to talk about. And Alon, I know you'd mentioned Homebrew, and so for me, Homebrew is like one of the things that I do first. Again, I work on a Mac, and so it's one of the tools that like is the first install that I have is going to be Homebrew, right? And I was talking about like some of the tools that I install out of the box using Homebrew. Excuse me. So like if I have Homebrew installed on my machine, so if I do brew list, you know what I mean, you can see some of the tools that I have based on Homebrew. So you see I have, you know, I use Git, and there's you know, wget and curl and mono, and there's some things to manage environments. So like PyEnv is a thing I use to manage Python environments. And when I say manage environments, like you might have multiple versions of the thing on your machine. So like I have multiple versions of Python. How do I switch back and forth between like the version that I want to use? Or I have multiple versions of Node, right? Like how can I say, okay, when I'm working on this project, I want to use this version, or when I'm working on that project, I want to use that version. I know a lot of folks in the .NET space are used to, what's it called, global.json file that like in your folder in .NET, like the global.json file will help you scope that folder or that, you know, part of your hard drive to a particular version of .NET. Well, some of these other tools, again, like, you know, so again, I have Node env, my machine, and it'll help me see like what versions I have. So if I do Node env local, oh, of course, because there's nothing.
Right, because you're not in a.
So, but as you can see, I can see global, like what are the global versions I have on that machine. I think if I do Node env-L, and it's just going to spew a bunch of stuff. Like these are all the versions of Node that I can install. I think the most recent version is 18.10. I don't think this is like the absolute, you know, top point version. But like when you're talking about like point versions, like I don't really care that much.
Yeah.
As long as you have the latest major version, that's important. So again, so like those are just some of the tools that I use when I have Homebrew on my machine.
So do you do this before like every single project?
Do I install
Homebrew before doing every single project?
No, so I do it every time I get a new machine, right?
Oh, so, okay.
Homebrew is something that you only have to install one time, right? Like it's a command line tool that is always on your machine. And if I need a new command line utility on my Mac, first thing I do is I go and see if it's in Homebrew, right? So I'll show you an example. Like I'll do brew. So brew obviously is short for Homebrew. I'll do brew search, and let's say I was looking for, I don't know, Postgres, right? Postgres, I think is how they spell it, right? And if I search for it, password thing. Give me a second. Let me take this off screen real quick.
Okay,
and what I'll do is that, you know, I'll search for a thing, and then I'll see if, oh my God, I hate this thing. I'll search for it, and then I'll see if it actually exists in the Homebrew space kind of thing. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to put in these password things, and then and in a second or two, this should, you know, do what it's supposed to do, and it should show me like the different Postgres things that are on here. Nice. So as you can see, like there's these different versions of that utility. So if I want to install that database on my hard drive, like I could do that, and that'll be, you know, again, that'll be an option for me. But no, again, like this is something that I install on my machine, and again, when I'm thinking about setting up. And I think Rodney might have shared this last week too. Like I usually have like a script of things that I use by default. So Git as an example, like almost every machine that I use Git on. So as a part of my setup, I'll have a thing that says Homebrew install Git. I don't need to install it now. I already have it, but you know that's a thing that you can do. Or you know if you wanted to do something like brew install curl or brew install and I'm pretty sure there's like MongoDB and Redis
Okay.
Yep.
stuff, right? Like if
Yeah.
you need things, command line things, you can install them using Brew and Homebrew.
So you understand how like NuGet is a package manager, right? So Homebrew is
Yeah.
basically an application manager. It goes and downloads various applications
Yeah.
and installs them on your machine. So
Oh, wow.
right, exactly. So just like you would have a list of NuGets that you use for every project,
Okay.
you have a list of things, applications, command line executables that you use on every machine, and you just create a script, you download Brew, and then you run Brew, and it provisions your machine in minutes versus like days.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I mean, I've installed Homebrew. I just wasn't sure. Like, I felt like, okay, like, should I be like continuously using it? I only have one machine.
Yeah.
And it's my MacBook. So, so yeah.
Yeah, I would tell you. I mean, once you know the things that you need, like it's one of those tools you use it when you need it. You don't need to use it every day. I don't use it every day, but if there's a thing I need to install, and I might assume that it's on my machine and it's not. Like again, for folks that have Macs, like something like wget is not on your machine by default. I thought it was,
wow.
but it's not. If you're coming from like the Linux Unix world, that might be a thing.
I gotta
So
write this
that's
down.
why, if you look at my I'm gonna do some Linux things. If you look at my Homebrew list and I do a grep real quick, you're gonna see I have wget in there, right? Stuff like Git, like you're gonna see that this list is gonna spit out, and I'm gonna have like Git in there, right? I think there's a Git that comes by default when you install the latest versions of Mac OS, but I don't think it's the latest version of Git.
Since
I don't
when?
think it is. I don't think it's the latest version, so I think you have to install it.
No, since when does Git come default on Mac? Since when
I
is
thought it
that?
did. Doesn't it? I thought it did. I feel like it did.
I always just go install it, so maybe it does, and I just haven't paid attention in the past.
Okay,
Well,
so
No, go
what
ahead.
is wget? Like, what does that do?
Oh, okay,
I know,
sure.
like, I feel like
No, let's talk
I'm
about it.
still learning. So
That's totally fine. So again, talking about utilities that we use. So
Okay.
wget is a command line script that essentially makes an HTTP request, and it it web gets, right. It goes and it gets something from a website. So I'll give you an example.
So it's like HTTP get, right?
It's kind of like that, but what you could do with it is that you can use it to like download stuff on your machine.
Okay, cool.
I'm trying to think of an example of a thing. All right, so let's imagine I went to, I don't know, I'm going to go to one of my repos, right, hypothetically, and I don't think I have any. So let's say if you wanted to do this thing where you download a zip, right? I'm just going to copy the link. I'm not going to actually run it. Is that the link? Boom, right? So now I can do, I'm going to go to my desktop, CD desktop. I'm going to do wget this thing. Paste. Why is it not pasting? Paste.
What did they just do?
Does pasting not work? What is going on? It pasted there. Copy. Paste. There we go. Wget that thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
The thing.
And now if I go to my desktop, you see it says, oh, that's not what I wanted to say. If I go to my desktop, you see like that file is there, right?
Okay.
Like I just I made that web.
Yeah. I see.
And I got it from, I got it from the internet. So imagine like you're writing scripts now, right? Because a lot of folks are writing Z shell scripts or bash scripts, even PowerShell scripts, right? And a part of your script is saying, hey, I want to go download this thing from the internet or from the network somewhere or wherever it is. And a part of your script is like, I'm going to download this thing. I'm going to unzip it, right? And again, there's command line utilities you could use to do that. I'm going to unzip this zip file or tar file or whatever it is. And I'm going to like install it, or I'm going to copy it to a folder, or I'm going to just run it, right? So all those things, you're like, okay, I'm going to go, it's not on my machine. I'm going to go into outer space and pull it down. And then I'm going to have it, I'm going to place it wherever I want to place it, put it wherever I want to put it. And then now it's just good to go.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm learning so much already.
No, but this is good. But again, we all learn from each other, right? So like tools you use, tool Rodney used, like these little things that we take for granted. I just assume everyone uses this stuff.
Yeah.
When we have these conversations, we realize, oh, well, that's actually not the case.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's always good to share. So those are some of the things that I use Homebrew for. One of the things I had mentioned to Rodney last week was this command line tool called Mass. And I think it's also on GitHub. So kind of like I was mentioning that Homebrew is like Rodney said, Homebrew is kind of like a package manager for like the utilities that you want to install on your Mac. Mass is like the same thing, but for like GUI applications,
Okay.
right? So if you wanted to install, they kind of call it, the, the Mac store of the command line kind of
Oh,
situation,
wow.
right? So if I kind of scroll down here, and again, I could install it with Homebrew, and now I could look for like, whatever types of utilities they have, inside of their repository. So look, I can install Xcode with Mass if I wanted to, right? Like, different types of screen apps and all kinds of cool stuff you can install. You can install Paint Code, or
Mhm.
I don't think this is still active. I don't know. I don't think there's still a Twitter app. Is there? Maybe there is. I don't know.
I think so. Well,
But
I
if you
actually have a
wanted
question
to,
about this. So I'm wondering, like, where's the intersection between Homebrew and this tool, right? Like what makes this tool more desirable than Homebrew?
Wow.
What feature does it have that Homebrew doesn't that would
yeah,
make me want to use it?
yeah,
Ooh.
yeah. So like it says here, like it's a command line interface for the Mac App Store,
Ah, that's why.
right?
Okay.
Whereas Homebrew is more so like, again, command line tools and open source utilities you
Right.
might want to install. So again, I'll give you an example of tools that I use. So one of the things I have inside of here, I'll do a brew list, Azure or something like that, right? Like you'll see I have like the Azure CLI, I have the AWS, like different CLIs on my machine.
Mhm.
I would never go and get that from the Mac App Store,
Got it.
right? Like, if I mean, I could pull it up, but you all could pull it up if you wanted to. Go in your Mac App Store if you're on a Mac and type in like Azure or AWS or
Yeah.
anything on that. You won't see command line tools in there, right? You're not going to see
Okay.
wget, you're not going to see Git, you're not going to see, OpenSSL and all these other types of tools in the App Store, right? These are more so, again, open line tools that you're going to go on GitHub or, wherever their homepage is, download them and put them in your path on your machine and have them working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there we go. All right. So that's Homebrew. So that's, again, like one of the first things I like to do when I set up my machine. Another thing I like to do is like customize my terminal. So as you see here, I'm using iTerm 2, right? That's not a default terminal that's inside of Mac OS, right? So I think the default one is just called a terminal, right? I like this one because, again, I can have like some different customizations to it. And I was showing this to Rodney last week. So if I kind of come in here and I search for like the status bar, right, and I try and configure the status bar, I have a lot of cool utilities that I could do. Like, for instance, if I wanted to see like what my CPU utilization is like I can drag this down and I can bring it down here. Or if I wanted to see like what my network activity was like, and again, we're just talking about like little small graphs and charts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I can grab it and I can drag it down there. I don't notice if you see it, but as I drag this stuff down, right here at the bottom, here it's showing, megabytes up and down, what I mean? And it's showing CPU utilization and stuff like that. But it's showing it right there in the command line. So if you can imagine that you're a person, I'm just going to leave them there for now. If you can imagine that you're a person that you spend a lot of time in your command line and your screen might look like this and you're full screen all the time, right? Instead of me having to like move around so much, I could just glance down and I could see, oh, look, I'm signed into Cecil. This is probably super small for you to see, but I'm signed into Cecil.
Oh.
There's a desktop here. You know what I mean? I'm at 11% utilization on my MacBook. And then here I could see the amount of bytes that are going in and out from from my network card, right?
Oh, wow.
And so for me, it's just, again, like I like this terminal because I have that level of customization. It just makes it, it's just convenient for me to use, right? And so it's one of the things.
Yeah. That's another thing I learned from watching the first episode was that there were different terminals. I didn't know that there were different terminals like that. I mean, I know there was one like that's, directly in my MacBook, but I usually just use like VS Code and the terminal within VS Code. So I didn't know that you could like select something different.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I had to learn, and I'll be honest about this, last year, was I didn't realize that there was a difference between a shell and a terminal.
Okay.
Right? And I think Scott Hanselman had a thing about that. Let me see if I can find it. S. Hanselman. I think it was a video or something. But anyway, shell terminal. Well, there's a difference between a shell and a terminal. Maybe it's on YouTube. I'm gonna look and see if I can find it. But anyway, from my understanding, right, the shell is the thing that you actually like execute the commands in, right? And then your terminal.
Oh, okay. So when you say shell versus terminal, you're talking about like bash, awk,
Right.
ZSH. You're talking about the actual application that's executing inside the terminal.
Right. So right now I'm using iterm2. That is my my terminal.
Right.
Right. But my shell that I'm using is ZSH. So again, like you said, that's running the commands. I could still use iterm2, but I could use it with PowerShell. I could use it with, like you said, bash or ZS. I'm using ZSH. I think there's one called fish. Never tried that one. But again, you have options for what you want to use, right? And each of them have their own particular semantics, right? And syntax for how you do things, and how does history work, as an example. You know what I mean? So I'll give you an example here. Like if I did something like, what's one thing I've been doing on here? If I did something like .NET, right? And I pressed up, as I pressed up, what it's doing is just like cycling through the commands, right? Because all these things, like packages I've added, stuff that I'm doing, because I forget stuff sometimes. So I'm like, hey, what's that command I did the other day to do a thing, right? Just like if I type git, like there was a command I used, git clean. Like what was the other flag behind of it? Notice if I press up, it's press -df, right? Git clean -df is one of my favorite commands now, because what it does is that now if you switch between repos, what you might notice is that like some of the not repos, as you switch between branches, some of the artifacts from the previous branch are still in there. They're just not tracked, but they're in the folder. So what this will do is it'll help me clean it out. But again, I forget stuff. So I'm like, oh shoot, how do I do that again? Git clean up, right? And then the command, again, it helps me be productive. It helps me remember stuff that I'm not trying to commit to memory all the time, right?
Yeah.
Again, thinking about like productivity, like it's super useful.
There's aliases for stuff like that. Yeah, you can.
We could use. We're gonna get into that. That's a perfect.
Oh my goodness, this
segue.
So much. Yeah,
that's a perfect segue. That's a perfect segue. So we talked about the shell. We talked about the terminal. Now, one of the things that I used to customize my terminal is this thing called OMZSH, right? OMZSH, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And OMZSH, again, it's just because I use the ZSH shell, right? It's just like utilities, it's themes like colors and stuff like that you could use to kind of customize your terminal. And in addition to just the themes, like it also has a bunch of plugins, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you like some of the plugins that I like to use inside of here. Now, if you're looking at your root directory, like you have OMZSH installed. And if you want to know how to install it, I'll tell you to go to the website and do it. I'm pretty sure there's like a brew install situation. Or see, look, you can use wget. Here's a good example of using wget.
Oh,
right?
wow.
You can wget install OMZSH or my ZSH. Now, once you have it installed, you'll have this OMZSH folder. And then inside of here, you'll have like plugins and you'll have themes. So when we talk about themes, it's the thing that gives color to what you're doing, right? So if you notice, like my prompt here has like, it's blue and has this green situation going on, right? You notice like my font here is a certain color, right? You notice if I type commands, right? Like it colors a certain way, right? Like I have no command called cod, right? But if I type code, you notice like the color is different.
Yeah.
Right. So like it even helps you with like typos, right? Like this is not the command I want to execute, but this is. Notice how it changes the colors and stuff like that for me. And like those little things, as trivial as they may seem, make a big difference.
Yeah.
Because now when I'm looking back and I'm like, oh man, why isn't this working? It's like, oh shoot, I made a typo. And I know because the colors are different. And that's not what the color a command is supposed to be. You know what I mean? Like so those little things make a big difference. All right, so I'm inside of this OMZSH folder. Now, I like to look inside of plugins. And one of the reasons why I'm kind of going into it like this is because once you have it installed, again, and you're going to see all these different plugins in here, each of these has a README in it. And I love that because now, not only do I just say, hey, I want to use the plugin, I can actually look and see what the README does without having to go to the internet, right? Like it's all here on my machine. So what's an example of one I like to use? Like we were talking about homebrew earlier, right?
Yep.
So I think there's a brew one. Let's see if we could find it. BREW. Here it is, right? And let's take a look at what it's insiders. Let's take a look at what its README looks like, right? And I'll switch over to the actual rendered markdown,
Mhm.
right? But here you can see, here's how you install the plugin, right? Like you'd add it to your your dot file, your .zsh file. And then here, again, speaking of aliases, kind of like what Rodney was doing a little while ago, here are some of the aliases that it will add to your command line, right? So, brew upgrade, right? Or, brew upgrade and brew outdated, right? The outdated command shows you, hey, I have these utilities installed, but there's newer versions and I got the old stuff. So show me which ones I need to upgrade, right? Um, and then you notice they even have like aliases that like reference aliases. It's kind of crazy when you kind of get into it. But
Yeah.
again, by me installing this plugin, like this is what I get from it, right? Like I get these
Yeah.
additional things on my command line that are really helpful. Now, I think there's a good and a bad to it. The good part of it is obviously it's adding a lot of useful utilities.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the bad part is like if you go to someone else's machine and you make assumptions, because what happens now, you have muscle memory in your fingers,
Hmm.
and your fingers are like, oh, this command is not working. What is happening here? Oh, you know what? This is not my machine. So I don't have certain things, in here and set up.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's any other interesting ones that we could take a look at. Look, there's even one here for .NET. Let's look at what the .NET one looks like and see what kind of extensions and stuff it gives us. Right, so .NET Core CLI plugin, right? And so .NET New, it's DN, .NET Run, DR, right? So again,
Yeah.
like it's reducing the amount of keystrokes we have to use. To do.
Wait a minute. What? Wait, so yeah, like you can use like abbreviations and everything like that, and it runs.
Yeah,
like,
so these are the aliases again, like Rodney was mentioning. I can use two letters instead of two words to do the same thing, right?
Oh,
It's going to
God.
execute the same command. But again, the thing to remember is that, like, again, these are aliases, and these aliases are going to be specific to your machine.
Okay,
So-
I get it. Yeah, like because if you're in someone else's machine and you're putting DR,
They're not going to have the same setup, right? This is your setup. Like you customize your machine how you want it.
very
So-
particular.
Right, exactly. So again, these are all like different plugins and stuff like that you get from OMZSH. And I'll be honest with you, like this comes out of the default installation. I didn't add anything to it. I haven't tweaked anything yet. Like this is the default. So it comes with this plugin. It comes with the Docker plugin. It comes with the Brew plugin and the Git plugin, and all of this stuff is just in here. All you got to do is just turn it on, right? So again,
so I still have to turn it on though, right?
You got to turn it on. So let me show you how you turn it on.
Okay, yeah.
If it was there and my fingers didn't find it, I feel some kind of way.
No, you gotta turn it on. So here's what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna go. I went too deep. I'm gonna go back up. So I was right. I was in the right place. So the way that you enable these plugins is in your .zsh file, right? Your .zsh file is your Z shell file. You know what I mean? It has nothing to do with OMZSH. Again, OMZSH is more like something to extend that shell, right?
Okay.
So what I'm going to show you now, code-insiders. I use insiders. I'm going to tell you why I use insiders in the next one. And then you have a .zsh file, right? zsh.rc file. So if we take a look at this, as soon as this opens in a second, I'll show you what it looks like. And I made sure I like hit all the crazy stuff, so you're not going to see my keys and everything. So one of the things you'll see once you install OMZSH, notice this first line that's here, right? Like it's pointing to that folder that has that stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to say too, I didn't do this. When you install it, like it'll do this for you. So I might be showing you some things, and you're like, oh my gosh, like how do I know the syntax? I haven't touched it. Like this is out of the box. It'll do it for you. So don't worry about it. The one thing I did change, so if you remember, I showed you like there's plugins and themes. I did set the theme, right? And so again, the theme has to do with like the different colors and all this types of stuff. So this is how you choose your theme inside of here. And look, there's even like this little GitHub link too. If you wanted to go over here real quick, and you can see what those themes look like, right? And you can kind of, you can scroll through and you can see, okay, I like this color, I like that color.
Yeah.
Whatever. Like you can kind of choose which ones you're using. Like I'm using this Agnoster theme, you know what I mean? Mainly because I like how the command prompt is, right? But again, you could scroll through. You might like this one better, or you might like this one that says amuse better, right? Again, like they all have like different functionalities and behaviors and things of that nature. So, there's a lot here. If you notice, like the scroll bar is very tiny, so that means that there's a lot.
Oh my god.
So
That is, yeah.
You can kind of scroll through and you could pick and choose again, like the setup and the configuration that makes sense for you.
Yep.
So that's an option that's in there, right? So that's how you set the theme, and you could read these comments. There's a bunch of other stuff you could set in there too.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things we can do, let's go down to plugins. So here's where we put the plugins, right? Now you'll notice that I only have Git in here. So what if I wanted to install that brew plugin, right? Well, I don't really need to install it, right? I just have to turn it on. So I guess what I do is I hit a space and I just type brew, because where do I get that name brew from? That's the name of the folder, right? So if you remember when we if I did open, I'm just going to show you what this looks like. OMZSH plugins, yeah. I'm just adding the name of the folder. So I have a folder called brew. I'm going to add that. I also have a folder called, where is it? .NET. Let's add that too, right?
So it's funny. I'm following along and I'm looking over here in my ZSH RC file, and there it is. I've already got plugins.
Yeah, see,
wow.
installed and didn't even realize it.
Right, brew, .NET. What's one other thing we looked at? Let's do Docker, right? That's going to be probably the next thing to talk about. And so now I'm going to save it. Now inside of my VS Code too, another little quick tip, I like to have autosave on. So, because I forget to save stuff. You know what I mean? My autosave is always on. So if I do nothing and this shuts down, it's already saved, right? So that's good and that's done. Now I'm going to close this, or let's just minimize this for a little bit. Okay. Now, because I already have this terminal open, and I just like updated my ZSH file, and I don't have, it doesn't know that I installed, quote unquote, installed those new plugins yet, right? Mm-hmm. So what do? Well, I'd have to open a new session. How do I open a new session? I just open a new window. That's it, right? Oh. But in this new window, I'm going to close this old one, right? Let's take a look at this new window. Move this over, plus to make it bigger for folks so everyone can see what is happening, right? And now I should have some of those .NET commands here. So let me go over to my desktop because I don't want anything in my root folder. And if I do dn, what does dn do? dn is .NET new, right? Because you saw that we got that from you saw that we got that from that plugin, right? So all of those aliases that we have are now available, right? And again, if you ever forget, I can come into the folder, I can open this README file, open Insiders, yeah? And I could see, so there's .NET Watch, .NET SLN, so on and so forth. DB is .NET Build. What happens if I do a .NET Build in a folder that doesn't have any .NET code in it? It's probably going to give me an error. But see, but the point is, what I'm trying to show you is that we have, again, the ability to save keystrokes using these aliases, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. So can I ask you a question, Cecil?
Sure, shoot.
And you too, Rodney. What do you guys prefer using, shell or terminal? Like since they're two different things, I'm learning.
Well, you can use them together, right? So,
okay.
So I'm using iTerm as the terminal and ZSH as the shell. So like they're the same thing, right? So if, for instance, you're using VS Code and you use the terminal in VS Code, that VS Code terminal is loading a shell, right?
Okay.
So let's talk about that. So this is VS Code. I hit little
open up the terminal and
open up the little terminal.
Look the same,
right?
Because he's loading the ZSH.
But notice this thing looks the same.
Yeah.
Right. Notice I have that same. Let me go into my .omzsh. Notice how like this part, like the pointer looks the same. Mm-hmm. Now the theme is different because this has a dark background, this has a light background. Yeah. But the terminal, like the shell, is the same shell.
Right.
If I do dn .NET new, I still have it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the same shell.
Right.
The terminal is just the UI, right? The pretty thing that like gives it the visual, right?
Okay.
The terminal, the shell is the thing that executes the commands. So you can use them both together. So I'm still using OMZSH, I'm still using ZSH, I'm still using those aliases I showed you in VS Code, but I'm using the VS Code terminal versus me using iTerm2, which is an external application.
Okay. So the way I'm understanding this is that the shell is kind of like the back end and the terminal is the front end. It's the visual.
Sure. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
that's a good analogy that you can make. So So when you think about your executing command lines on any system, Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever the case is, like there's those two pieces that are in play, right? The thing that gives you the visual and the thing that like does the work.
Yeah.
So like you said, back end and front end, right? Like it's I don't know, it's been like that for probably before I was born, like decades.
Yeah.
So that's just that's just how that part of the ecosystem works.
Got it. Cool.
Okay.
I'm learning so much.
Yeah, this is awesome stuff, I think. All right, so we have that. So we talked about plugins on ZSH setup. There's one little piece I want to talk about, and then Ilana, I'm going to switch over to you and give you a chance to kind of like talk about your stuff.
Okay.
And this is actually going to be something we're going to dive into more next week, which is Docker, right? Now, so for folks that don't know what Docker is, I like to consider Docker to be like a isolated process that runs on my machine, right? Like Docker allows me to run things in a way that like doesn't interfere with anything else. So as an example, we saw earlier that like I can go and I'm going to use, a shortcut, brew up, right? If I did brew install, what was I showing you guys? Like I can install stuff with brew,
Yeah.
but it's on my machine. Like it's on my hard drive. It's moving things around and putting stuff on my file system. But I can also do the same thing with Docker. But when it's in Docker, it's not going to mess with anything in my file system. It's going to be in its own isolated space, right? So from the perspective of the command or the process or whatever, your web server, your code, whatever you're running, it's going to think it's on your machine, but really it's in like an isolated space, right? Like it's not, but it's not.
So it's like a virtual machine?
It's like a virtual machine. That's a good analogy. If you think about the virtual machine as like the entire machine, think about Docker more so as like the process.
So it's like a virtual process. Like I spin up a isolated space to run and execute this process.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, that's what you want to do. And the reason for that now is because one of the things people love Docker for is the fact that, well, it's smaller than a virtual machine. So now I can have multiples of these on my machine at the same time. If you think about, when I think about like back in the day when I used to spin up a lot of virtual machines, like it was very hard for me to have more than like one or two virtual machines on my machine, because when you install a virtual machine, you're installing an entire operating system.
Yeah.
So imagine having like, whatever you're using Windows, and now I'm installing two other operating systems on that machine. That takes up a lot of space. And imagine me doing that just because, I want to run my app in like two different environments or whatever the case is, or one thing is running a database and the other thing is running the web server, and like that's a lot for a machine. Well, what I can do now is I can have like these two separate processes. One is in Docker, one is in one Docker container, one can be in another Docker container, and they could talk to each other, but it's taking up so much less space, so much less resources, and also it again, it doesn't mess around with stuff in your file system.
So it's almost like it's condensed through the Docker container.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like it's condensed. So one of the things I like to do, so you'll hear people talk about Docker in terms of like DevOps and DevSecOps and all that kinds of stuff. I'll be honest with you, I'm gonna be very frank. I don't really care that much. You know what I mean? Like what I do use Docker for is for this. I like to, let me move this off screen. I love to use Docker for processes that I just want to, when I just want to try stuff out and not actually put stuff on my machine. Like that's what I use it for. Again, you could use it for deployments and scaling out workloads and all that stuff, but I don't work in that space. But I do like trying out different databases and different tools and utilities. And I hate the fact that when I look at my folder, there's all of these leftover artifacts. It bothers me. Like my ADHD kicks in. I'm like, I gotta delete all the things that I don't want anymore, right? But now let's say I wanted to do something like, let's look for Mongo, right? I wanted to find MongoDB. Here we show you Docker pull. That's all I have to do to install MongoDB on my machine. Done, right? Wow. That's it. Now I have Mongo, it's up and running, and now I can start interacting with it. And then when I don't want it anymore, I just delete it, and any trace of it ever being on my machine is gone. Bye.
Wow.
I don't have to think about it again.
That's satisfying.
Right. Same thing if you wanted to use, what's another cool example? Like, I don't know. If you want to use, RabbitMQ, if you wanted to use Redis, you can find
I was using Docker last night to try and install RavenDB.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they probably have
it's there.
A thing. Yeah, there you go. RavenDB, right? Like they have a thing, and here you go. Docker pull Raven AB, right? So they have a namespace controller, right? So you can go in and install this stuff. So again, one of the reasons why I love doing this is because, hey, I can just kind of go and pull stuff down. Now I'm gonna kind of leave it there, because again, I do want us to talk about this more next week, and we'll dive into it a little bit more.
Yep.
But I kind of wanted to talk about it because again, like these are just some of the things that I like to use as I'm developing stuff. And then, again, for folks that are watching live, or maybe you're catching the recording, you could talk about what you're loving to use, and leave us some comments so we could talk about any other new tools and autorations and stuff like that y'all are playing with. But with that being said, I'm gonna step back, and I'm gonna give Alon a moment so she can come on and show us her stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's so funny that you brought up Docker, because that's actually one of the things I have on my list of tools
nice.
that I use. Let me see if I can.
Okay, so we see your screen, and you got like the Docker window up.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So yeah, I didn't even know that you could use Docker for so many different things like that. Like, I am learning about the container and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
I've used Docker recently when I was doing my REST API series for dotNET book study. And I used Docker for the database, for the SQL database, because, as a MacBook user, you can't use the regular Microsoft SQL. You need to use it with Docker for some reason. I'm not really sure why. So that's kind of what
I'm sorry, say it again. You couldn't use what?
I think the normal Microsoft SQL.
Right.
Like you can't use it on a MacBook.
Microsoft SQL.
Oh yeah, you can't.
Mac, so you have to put it in a Docker. So that's the general thing that I've learned as a Mac user is things that people can install on Windows. I generally have to use a Docker container for, and that's the extent of my knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm starting to understand. It's just like it can be a whole different ball game if you're a MacBook user with .NET. So in order for me to use any type of database like that, I need to do it through Docker. And then for my IDE, I use VS Code. I prefer VS Code over Visual Studio just because VS Code, it's a bit lighter on my machine, and the startup is quicker with VS Code than Visual Studio.
It is for sure. Not lying about that.
Yeah. And so, okay, another thing I like to do, let's see. So for my themes, and this may also be like my version may also be a little bit shorter just because I like to keep things a little bit more simple. The projects that I do, I'm still learning about. So I'm more so in the exploring phase. So, for my theme, let's see, do I have it up? I'm going to go here to extensions. I like to keep things dark. So when you were showing your VS Code, I was like, wait a minute. That was VS Code. I'm used to the dark theme. So I like Dracula Official.
Oh, nice.
I like that it's dark and it has like the little pops of pink because that's one of my favorite colors. The pops of color. It's super fun. It looks almost like a little slight purple, but the visuals are important if you're going to be looking at this all day. And then for GitHub, like I love using GitHub Desktop just because I feel like it's easier to, push your project up to GitHub when it's right in your desktop. I feel like it's like, say if you want to add a new repository, you just create new repository and then, fetch origin, and then you just push it up to your GitHub. And then let's see what else is on my list.
It's funny too, because I remember using GitHub Desktop a long time ago. Like when I first started to learn Git, there was this. I think there was another one called SourceTree or something.
SourceTree still out there. Yep.
Yeah, I tried to use SourceTree. I didn't get it.
And then there was another one because now I'm just like, okay, I don't really understand how this Git thing works. let me find a thing that I could press a button and it'll figure it out until I learned it.
Yeah,
And I think one of the things, I don't know if it still does it, but at the time there was a term, like there was a output window that would show you the commands that it was executing, and I would just look at it. Most of it I don't understand, and most of it I probably still don't. But I would look at it and I would just be like, okay, commit, push, remote, got it. Boom. I got like the main commands that I need. But I think for me, like this was like a really good learning tool. And I'll be honest with you, even to this day, I still feel like I'm learning it. Like I'm still learning new commands and stuff like that. Like still, like I just did my first rebase like a month ago.
What?
You know what I mean?
What?
I don't even know what that means.
See, well, like that's what I'm saying. Like,
oh man,
because we all work in different environments, right?
We do.
I've done, I know what merges. I've been doing merges all day, every day. But like, oh, you can rebase? What is this rebase?
Git rebase dash I.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So again, just to show you like just different commands that you learn like as you start to just get comfortable with the tool.
So what made you like decide to stop using GitHub Desktop? For me, it's just simple. I like when things are just simple and straight to the point.
I'll be honest with you. I think it was one of those things where I was like going to another computer and I was just like, I don't feel like installing stuff. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So outside of Homebrew, right? And back when I was still on Windows machines, and Rodney, let me know if you relate to this. Like I used to install Visual Studio. I used to install SQL Server Management Studio.
Yep.
I used to install what's that thing called?
So do you remember when MSDN came on CDs and you had to like stick them in your drive?
Yeah, you had to put
Visual Studio?
I used to install Visual Studio via CD, and you'd sit down and that thing would spin, and you're sitting. I'll swear to you, you'd sit down for hours. To like install a thing.
Go get a cup of
One
coffee.
day I thought it was smart. one day. And I was like, I'm going to install Visual Studio and SQL Server Management Studio at the same time. That was not a smart idea. Because I think it took longer. Because now I'm trying to do two things.
It exploded.
so on theme with this, I actually wrote a script years ago to install them remotely so I could I got so tired of the CDs, I took the ISOs off and installed everything from the ISOs. It was great.
But that stuff takes time, you know what I mean? And so I think I hit one day. I just hit peak frustration. I'm just like, I'm not installing anything else. Like I'm done.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm out the game.
You know what I mean? I just want to know. I just want to save my code and send it into outer space. Like git commit, git push. And I'll be honest with you, for years, git commit, git push was it for me, right? Like commit, push, because that's all I really needed to do. And I know how to switch between branches. So I knew like 3 Git commands that like got me through 80% of the use cases that I was facing. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, okay, well, I don't need to install a thing on top of the thing that I'm using. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I'll just run these 3 commands and I got comfortable with it. But then again, like just like anything that we do, like we as in like the industry or developers do, like the more you use something, the more comfortable you get, right? And then you're like, oh, okay, well, let me try this other command. Let me see what this other thing does. And then you kind of just you kind of go down the rabbit hole a little bit to like learn new stuff.
Yeah. So is GitHub Desktop, is that just the UI then?
Yeah.
Yes.
You still have the command line on your machine.
It's for GitHub.
Oh,
like
wow.
Git client desktop applications. Like I use GitKraken to look at my visual tree, but I'm still very much, I do it all in the command line. I'm like you, I've got maybe 15 Git commands that I use on a consistent basis. And I've learned more every couple of months. Somebody will tell me, like I learned about Git bisect recently. I had never heard of it, never used it, right? So, I'm very much, I'm already in my IDE. I just have my terminal is down by my unit tests. So it's like I just go from the unit test to the terminal, enter in my stuff, off it goes, and I don't pay any attention to it until I have to do something like a rebase or any type of complex merging. Then I go and look at my visual tree in another application because I like the way it looks.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. So I will say, and you just reminded me that for me, and what I so VS Code, when I was using Visual Studio, I would only use like the click play, as the .NET run. Yep. But it was VS Code that helped me get comfortable with using the terminal and making those those commands in the terminal. So that's why I do feel like when I use Visual Studio, it almost feels like it feels weird now, like pressing
Yeah.
the button when I can just
Yeah.
do, the .NET Run. And it's become a preference of mine to do everything through the terminal. So
Yeah. But that's good though. I feel like we're at a point where like the culture of like
Culture.
development is a little bit different, right?
Yes.
Because if you go back to, like when I was first learning, you go back to like, I don't know, 2005, 2008. If it didn't have a button, like nobody was doing it. You know what I mean?
No.
Like everything had to have a button. At least if you were in that Microsoft space, like
Yes.
everything had to have a button. You know what I mean? Else people never discovered it. And then now, obviously now the world is different and people have just become more
Yes.
command line friendly. I feel like we're in a
Okay.
command line first experience for like a lot of different tools and utilities, and then the UI is just like a facade over the command line, right? At the end of the day. And so
I
now
feel
it
like
gives us like the option, right? Like you can go all in one way or the other way, or you can do like
Yeah.
50-50, right? And if you wanted to.
Maybe I'll
I feel like that kind of started because .NET went command line first with the new runtime, right? So everything became .NET build, .NET run, .NET restore, and that kind of really helped bring .NET into the CLI culture, because anyone that comes from like a Unix background, I mean, the CLI, like
That's normal.
it's a normal thing. Like it's an everyday part of what you do. Yeah, you have GUIs, but you look for the CLI first. So I really feel like .NET doing that kind of helped drive that culture shift in the space.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun for me. You're just like, okay, boom, let's get it.
No, for sure, for sure. So I'm curious then. I'm curious because have you ever heard about this tool called GitLens?
Yes.
Have you ever tried that?
Yeah, I use it.
So GitLens is an extension inside of VS Code, and it's one of the extensions. I think it's like, millions of downloads, like one of the top rated ones. And so I'm kind of curious, Alana, if you've ever tried it and ever used GitLens in VS Code, because
I'm
like you
gonna
said,
write
like
it down. I've
yeah,
never heard of it.
I'd love to hear what you think about it. I had it and I took it off.
Oh,
Why did you take it off?
Well,
yes.
let's talk
You
about
gotta
why we
talk
took it
about
off.
that.
It's a good extension. I took it off because it was adding like a lot of context to my code that I didn't want.
Fair enough.
When I say context, like, so you open VS Code and then like, you'll have like the overlays over your lines of text, and it'll be like, committed by Cecil 2 days ago, whatever. And at a point, like I'm looking at my code and there's all of this context, and I'm like, I don't want this.
Right.
You know what I mean? I want it when I want it, but like as I'm reading through code, like I really don't need to see all of it.
Yeah.
So for me, again, I think it's good to have it. For me, I didn't want it, and so like I turned it off. I took it off. You know what I mean? So again, I'm saying so not because it's a bad extension. It was just giving me too much stuff.
Too much. It's too much.
And it's funny, I'm the exact opposite, right? So a lot of the times I'm working on either open source projects or enterprise projects where there's hundreds of different people that could commit to this given line of code, and sometimes git blame is too hard to type, and it's right there in my terminal. Like I can see who, as I'm traversing the code lines of code, it's showing me who was the last person to touch it, what date they touched it on, what work item it was committed against, and information like that is very valuable when I need it. And like you said, sometimes you don't need it, but my eyes actually drown it out when I'm writing new code, because generally when I'm writing new code, it doesn't show up because it hasn't actually been
fresh.
committed to history,
fresh.
right? But when I'm digging through, looking, trying to fix a bug, and I can see, oh, this developer touched it last a month ago, I can immediately go ping them, and it saves me a lot of keystrokes to try and figure out any contextual information about what it is that I'm doing.
I can see that.
I like it.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is a good example of, I feel like the three of us just work in different coding environments. And so because of that, like the needs are different, right?
Yeah.
And I want to say that because again, like I think it's a great extension. I just don't need it for the things that I'm doing.
Right.
For me, it's a lot. But I could totally see if, again, like if I was working on some production or some groups, if I was on a team that we're all working on the same thing, sure, I get it. Like that makes sense. Like I'd want to know that information. Like Rodney touched this, Alon touched this, Corey touched this.
Yeah.
Who added this file? Like I get it. You know what I mean? Versus me just like, hey, I'm just making stuff. And it's like, oh, well, you changed this like yesterday. And I'm like, I know.
I know that because it was me.
Here. I don't need to tell you. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So, So getting back into my tools. So GitHub, desktop, it's super easy for me. Maybe one day I'll get a little bit more acquainted with, Git commands in the terminal.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe not, we'll see.
Yeah.
But one thing that I have gotten a little bit more familiar with is just using Swagger, since
Oh,
I
yeah.
have been building APIs and stuff, understanding that, it helps to it helps to have a visual for the, like, HTTP GET, the pull, the post, the delete, and then keeping track of everything, all of the information that is, in your database can be
Yeah.
presented in Swagger. So that's one thing that I've been using. And I haven't really touched too much on Postman. It was only just a little bit. But I will say that I do kind of prefer Swagger just because it's kind of already built into, the normal REST API apps. So
So you can actually use them together, and that's
Yes.
a pretty common thing
oh
for
wow.
folks. Because
Okay.
if you think about because you got to think about the purpose of the tool, right? Like
Okay.
the intended purpose. So the purpose of Swagger is to give, and I think it's called Open API now, but I think Swagger is like an implementation of Open API or something of the sort. But anyway, the purpose is to give developers like a way to describe the API. So you built an API, you .NET add swashbuckle, right? Like
Yeah.
you configure the thing, it generates the Swagger for you. But then when you look at the raw Swagger file, it's a JSON file, and it tells you the inputs, the outputs, the status codes, the headers, the whatever, right? It tells you stuff
Yeah.
about your thing. And so now that's in a format that's program language neutral. You know what I mean? Because it's just JSON, right? It's not a
Yeah.
.NET thing. It's just a JSON thing. So
Yeah.
again, if I'm doing, I don't know, Swift or Python or JavaScript or whatever, like I can look at the thing, or I can plug it in a tool like this, or Postman. I can plug it in the tool, and it could describe the available operations, right? Which is useful. So one of the things I know folks like to do is, like, you generate your Open API spec or your Swagger spec, and you might make that Swagger spec internally public, because that's probably not the thing a lot of people want to make externally public.
Yeah.
And then they'll connect it to a tool like like Postman, and now
Yeah.
Postman will be like, oh, okay, let me show you the list of operations you have, and then you click the button, and now you can craft the request, which is really cool.
Oh wow.
I think for a lot of folks, like the UI that's inside of Swagger, most folks that I know only do it like on a personal level. Like, hey, I'm running the project and I want to run it for me. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, it's easy for me. But then when you think about sharing APIs outside of yourself, then, unless you're working with, I don't know, business folks or people that work in another language or whatever the case is.
Oh wow. Yeah.
You can't expect everyone to .NET run the thing, right? And then generate swashbuckle, and I'm clicking the UI, or Python run it, or Java, whatever. Like, you can't expect everyone to like work in your language to run the thing, to have the UI up. And then you also don't want to have the UI up out and available in the public too, because then now that could be like a security thing as well.
Yeah.
Right. But what you can do is you can use like another tool, and you can publish. A lot of folks like either just publish the file, like the JSON file, like they put it on GitHub or some CDN somewhere, and then you pull it into Postman, or it doesn't even have to be Postman. There's extensions in Visual Studio Code that can do it. But you pull in the file, and now it creates a UI that allows you to make requests for it. You know what I mean?
Oh wow. Okay.
So it's like
Okay.
you can do both. I think for a lot of folks, like Postman is a lot when it's just you, right? And when you're learning, it's a lot. But when it's you and a teammate, or when it's you and a significantly large API, you know what I mean? Then you want to do things like, well, how do I run tests, right? And how do I save requests? You know what I mean? Like, when I say save requests, not just like the get request, but hey, I want it saved with these parameters, with these keys, with this environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you can do those types of things in Postman, which again is a little bit more of a non-basic scenario. But again, it just depends on what you're trying to do, and like what's the purpose of the tool.
Yeah. So Postman is better for like larger scale projects.
Yeah, I just want to say, if you're collaborating with other people, Postman is better. And again, if you want to run tests like HTTP tests, you know what I mean? Like, there's a thing in there for it.
Right.
If you want to configure different environments. So I'll give you an example. So I might have my local machine is an environment, right? And then the cloud is another environment. I might have in Postman one that says localhost
Okay.
and another one that says, I don't know, production or staging
Yeah.
or whatever the case is, different environments. But each of those environments might require different API keys, different settings, whatever. So I can have those different settings in Postman. So when I'm running locally and I'm making requests, it's going to use like this particular key or this particular setting. And then when I hit the little drop down button, right? Because we like to click buttons. When we hit the drop down button, it goes to production or something else. Now it's like, okay, I'm going to use the production key or the staging key or the production setting or whatever the case is, or the production versioning. You know what I mean? Like you can have those things, and so you can run your tests or your scripts or your whatever based on like the environment that you're in, and you can do that through Postman, which again for me is like one of the main benefits to using it.
Yeah,
Got it.
That's actually how I used to use Postman. I would have a set of API calls that we would use, and that was the collaboration tool that we use with the testers, right? So when we would add new things, Swagger docs would get generated. Then Postman would be the thing that the testers would use. So we just had a collection of HTTP requests that they needed to make, and we used it as a way to do actual integration testing, like automated integration testing using Postman. So it becomes a very valuable tool when you're trying to hit the API from outside of your own bubble. Right?
Okay.
Like
yeah.
Saying, you don't want it to be like there's an internal wall where, hey, me, the developers, and other people are doing things. And then there's that external wall where maybe testers, product owners, and actual end users would be hitting it from. And to me, Postman gives me that flexibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Great stuff.
But this is why we share, right? So like we can all have all this information together. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Did you have more stuff that you wanted to share?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, like, I also like to use Discord because since I'm learning and I have like a community where we're all learning together. I will say Discord is such a great space to share, your GitHub links or like any type of like YouTube videos that people could benefit from, like any type of resource. Discord is awesome to share within. So
yeah. Awesome.
And then my last one is Xcode. And this is one that I no longer use. It's one that I used to have. And I will just say, like, it was super fun, kind of like fiddling with it. But unfortunately, it was just a little too heavy for my machine. So I don't know, Rodney, you're nodding like, do you use Xcode?
Xcode is something that I have to have on my machine because I'm a mobile developer. So using Xamarin, using Maui, I have to have Xcode. And I'm just agreeing, like, Xcode is heavy. Xcode does consume a lot, but it's a necessary evil for what I do. So I only open the editor maybe 3 to 4 times a year, the actual Xcode editor, and do stuff in Xcode. But it's just another IDE that I am required to have in order to do what I do.
So what is like the workaround? Like, and I would love to have Xcode, especially since, you needed to use dotNET Maui from my understanding. So what is the workaround with having something that's kind of like so huge on your machine? Like, how do you take care of that? Like, how does that happen?
So if you're talking about from like a resource perspective using the application, I don't actually open the IDE in order to use Xamarin or Maui. It gets piped out to the command line, and they use command line tools to interact with Xcode. So that's kind of how I get around needing to open Xcode very often. But every time I need to, hey, there's a bug on a very specific iPhone or Android or iPhone version, right? I have to go download the simulator to verify to find it. Like those are the times that I'm really interacting with Xcode. Setting up, managing certificates for iOS applications. That's where I'm in Xcode. I don't really write code in Xcode. I'm not really.
It's more like a management tool for you to like do stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll download it in the future. Maybe.
Yeah, no, but that was awesome though. I feel like in these past 2 weeks, like we've all learned like a whole bunch of stuff. Which has been great. So for folks, if you're watching still, definitely would love for y'all to go and check out all the cool stuff we talked about last week, and dive into this one this week, and let us know what are some of the tools that you personally use and have in your development machine, and some of the tools and techniques and scripts, and like how do you .NET, right? Like how do you have your stuff set up? Definitely let us know in the comments, or feel free to reach out to us on social media. If you look under the thing here, like you'll see like our names and tags and all this types of stuff.
Wait.
Feel free to reach out to us on like on Twitter, LinkedIn, like all the things, and
All the
we'll be happy
interwebs.
all the interwebs. We'll be more than happy to help you out. But with that being said, this has been another stream. We'll be back next week, so
Yes.
Please be here again next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll have some more amazing streaming content for you. All right. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.